Quebec is the only Canadian province where French stands alone as the sole official language, a place known worldwide for its literature, its music, its comedy, and a cultural identity guarded more fiercely than almost anywhere else in North America. What gets talked about far less is the food, a collection of dishes so specific to this one province that Quebecers have spent decades correcting the rest of the world on how badly it's been diluted the moment it crosses provincial lines. Poutine, smoked meat, wood-fired bagels, maple taffy on snow, a pudding invented by unemployed factory workers during the Great Depression. These aren't simply Canadian dishes wearing a regional label. They belong to Quebec specifically, and Quebec intends to make sure nobody forgets it. Welcome to the Savory Scroll. Let's unroll this one. Quebec is the largest province in Canada by land area and sits among the oldest European settlements anywhere in North America, predating the founding of the United States by well over a century. Its food culture developed in near total isolation from the rest of the continent, shaped by brutal winters, Catholic parish traditions, waves of immigration, and a stubborn cultural pride that treats recipes less like instructions and more like inheritance. Today we're looking at 11 dishes either born here, perfected here, or so completely absorbed into Quebec identity that no outside imitation has ever come close to the original. We begin, inevitably, with poutine, fries, cheese curds, gravy, and one of the most contested food origin stories in all of Canadian history. The dish emerged in rural Quebec sometime in the late 1950s, though its exact birthplace remains genuinely disputed, with at least 3 towns, Warwick, Drummondville, and Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu, all claiming to be its true home. The argument has run for over 60 years now, generating actual academic papers along the way. What nobody disputes is the texture requirement. The cheese curds must be fresh, unaged, and squeaky, fresh enough that biting into them produces an audible squeak, and the hot gravy poured over top is meant to soften those curds just slightly without fully melting them. That precise, fleeting texture is the entire point of the dish. Poutine now appears on McDonald's menus across Canada and on restaurant menus from Tokyo to London, and Quebecers will tell you, without hesitation, that virtually none of those versions qualify as real poutine, since swapping fresh curds for shredded mozzarella misses the dish's entire structural logic. Fittingly, the word poutine in Old Quebec slang originally just meant a mess, which might be either the most fitting name in Canadian food history or an early warning nobody heeded. Next comes tourtière, a dish tied directly to Christmas Eve tradition. Midnight mass ends, families return home, and in nearly every Quebec household, a spiced meat pie is waiting on the table, a tradition tracing back to 17th century Quebec settlers, over 400 years of continuous practice on a single plate. Every family insists their version is the definitive one, and the regional variation genuinely is enormous. In Montreal, tourtière typically appears as a shallow, single-crust pie built around ground pork, seasoned heavily with cloves and cinnamon. In the Lac-Saint-Jean region, it transforms into something else entirely, a massive, deep dish construction, layered with wild game, venison, rabbit, and partridge, barely resembling its Montreal cousin at all. The name itself traces back to the tourte, a passenger pigeon once used as the pie's original filling, a bird now completely extinct. The dish outlived the very ingredient it was named after. Before Quebec had much of anything else, it had maple trees, and the Catholic parish traditions that shaped rural community life eventually turned that maple abundance into tarte au sucre, sugar pie. The ingredient list is almost embarrassingly short: brown sugar, cream, flour, and butter poured into a pastry shell, and yet the result tastes far richer than something built from 4 humble pantry staples has any right to. This was parish fare food, made across generations by women stretching whatever little they had into something capable of feeding an entire community. The deeper indigenous relationship with maple sweeteners that predates the pie itself rarely gets mentioned in the retelling, quietly underpinning the entire tradition. In modern Quebec patisseries, tarte au sucre has undergone a genuine gourmet revival, with some elevated slices now selling for $15 each, a striking contrast to the women who first perfected the recipe and were never paid a cent for it. Montreal smoked meat arrived with a very different origin story, brought over by Eastern European Jewish immigrants who settled in Montreal in the late 1800s, carrying brisket curing traditions passed down through generations. What they built in their new home became one of the great delicatessen traditions in the world and simultaneously ignited one of the longest-running food arguments in North America: Montreal smoked meat versus New York pastrami. The two look deceptively similar and are in practice genuinely different foods. Montreal smoked meat is dry-cured for up to 10 days using a spice blend heavy in black pepper and coriander, then cold-smoked, steamed, and hand-sliced thick, with a noticeably higher fat content and a different final texture than pastrami. The ritual surrounding it matters just as much as the meat itself. Standing in a line stretching around the block outside Schwartz's Deli on Boulevard Saint Laurent is a genuinely different cultural experience from anything New York's deli scene offers. Schwartz's has operated continuously since 1928 without ever changing its recipe, and it's never once needed to. The Montreal Bagel followed a similar immigrant path into the city and immediately evolved into something distinctly its own: smaller, denser, sweeter, and wood-fired, with a noticeably larger center hole than its New York counterpart. The dough is mixed with honey and egg, boiled briefly in honey-sweetened water, then baked in a wood-burning oven, producing a chewier, crisper, more complex bagel that Montrealers will argue, without a moment's hesitation, is objectively superior to anything New York produces. That argument has been running for well over a century now, and if anything, it's only gotten more heated with time. The city's two oldest bagel bakeries, Fairmount Bagel and St. Viateur Bagel, sit just 4 blocks apart and have been openly competing since the 1950s, each one insisting they're the true original, and both operating 24 hours a day to prove it. Millions of people across Quebec eat Cretons for breakfast every single day, and almost nobody outside the province has ever heard of it. It's a spiced pork fat spread, made from ground pork slow-cooked with onions, cloves, and allspice until everything softens into a dense, spreadable terrine, traditionally served on toast. It's deeply savory, quietly indulgent, and has functioned as Quebec's morning staple for generations. It bears some resemblance to French rillettes, but arrives coarser in texture and leans harder into cinnamon and clove. Its complete absence from food culture beyond Quebec's borders remains one of the more genuinely puzzling gaps in North American cuisine, especially given how thoroughly it appears at nearly every traditional sugar shack breakfast across the province. Cipaille, sometimes spelled Six-Pâtes or called Six-Pâtes, might be the least known dish on this entire list, and possibly the oldest. It's a multi-layered game meat pie from the Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean region, built from venison, rabbit, and partridge layered between sheets of pastry dough, then slow-cooked for hours in a deep cast-iron pot until everything melds into something primal and genuinely extraordinary. The dish predates modern Quebec entirely, drawing from indigenous cooking traditions merged with early settler survival techniques, refined over centuries into something regional families still prepare today for major holidays, with some starting preparation 2 full days in advance. It remains one of the oldest dishes still regularly cooked and eaten in North America, and almost no one south of the St. Lawrence River has ever tasted it. Its name may trace back to a corruption of cipaille, a layered ship's provisions dish carried over by British sailors, one Quebec absorbed and transformed into something the original sailors would never recognize. Tire d'érable, maple taffy on snow, predates European settlement in Quebec entirely. Indigenous peoples in the region were already harvesting and reducing maple sap long before French explorers ever arrived, and the tradition of pouring hot syrup directly onto packed snow to cool it into a chewy, stretchy candy remains one of the oldest continuous food practices anywhere in North America. Today, it's the centerpiece of the Sugar Shack, the Cabana Sucre experience, Quebecers return to faithfully every single spring. The syrup gets boiled to a precise temperature, poured in long ribbons directly onto fresh packed snow, and rolled onto a wooden stick before it fully sets. The food and the surrounding experience are genuinely inseparable. You cannot recreate tire d'érable in an ordinary kitchen. It requires the snow, the cold air, and the shack itself. Some food historians go as far as arguing tire isn't really a recipe at all, but a ritual, and the argument holds up under scrutiny. Pouding Chômeur, translating directly to unemployed person's pudding, was born out of genuine desperation in 1929, as the Great Depression tore through Montreal and female factory workers needed to stretch whatever ingredients remained in their kitchens into something that could actually feed a family. What they invented is a simple cake batter poured over hot caramel or maple sauce and baked, and as it cooks, the batter rises while the sauce sinks, creating a self-saucing pudding where every single bite carries cake above and warm caramel below. The physics of it are genuinely remarkable, and the fact that it emerged directly from scarcity and deprivation before becoming a beloved dessert served in restaurants across the entire province is one of the more moving food stories of the 20th century. The women who invented it never became famous themselves. The dish outlived their names entirely. Modern Quebec chefs have since layered in sea salt, whiskey, and espresso, but the original version, built from whatever happened to be sitting in the cupboard during a depression, remains the most affecting. In 1951, a restaurant opened in Montreal that would go on to define how an entire province thinks about chicken. St-Hubert built Quebec's rotisserie chicken culture around a slow-roasted, carefully seasoned bird that became Sunday dinner for generations of Quebec families. But the real legend isn't the chicken itself, it's the sauce. St-Hubert's barbecue sauce, slightly sweet, slightly tangy, deeply savory, has been bottled and sold in Quebec grocery stores for decades, and Quebec households keep it stocked in the fridge the way other North American households keep ketchup on hand at all times. Outside the province, almost nobody has heard of St-Hubert at all, despite it being one of Canada's oldest and largest restaurant chains, one that's barely managed to cross the provincial border in over 70 years of operation. St-Hubert now runs more than 100 locations, almost entirely confined to Quebec, and a national expansion has reportedly been discussed for roughly 30 years without ever actually happening. Some things, it seems, simply belong to one place. And finally, our 11th dish, Pâté Chinois, Quebec's own peculiar answer to shepherd's pie, layered with ground beef, corn, and mashed potato, baked until the top turns golden. The name itself, translating to Chinese pie, carries a genuinely disputed origin story of its own. One popular theory traces it back to Chinese railway laborers working in Quebec in the late 1800s, who supposedly cooked a version of the dish for local workers using available ingredients, though food historians have never been able to fully confirm the story. What's certain is that the dish became, and remains, one of the most common home-cooked meals in the province, appearing on family dinner tables with a frequency that rivals tourtière itself, its layered structure so specifically Quebecois that attempts to serve it as generic shepherd's pie elsewhere in Canada are typically met with immediate, firm correction. Quebec isn't simply a province sitting on the map of Canada. It's a culture that spent 4 centuries figuring out exactly what it means to be unmistakably, unapologetically itself, and that identity runs straight through its food. It's there, in the survival recipes that became treasures, in the immigrant traditions that turned into permanent local institutions, and in the rituals that have never needed to change because they were never broken in the first place. The rest of the world has discovered poutine by now. Smoked meat restaurants and wood-fired bagel shops have opened from London to Los Angeles, and somewhere in Montreal right now, someone is eating the real version, shaking their head quietly at the imitation, and honestly, it's hard to blame them. If this changed how you'll think about your next plate of poutine or your next bite of tourtière, let us know in the comments which dish on this list surprised you the most. And don't forget to subscribe to the Savory Scroll, because next time, we're unrolling the food history of another region the rest of the world has been quietly getting wrong.